Yeah. All right, guys. I think we can get started. I'm sure a few people will filter in, but that is okay. I'm Adam Murfield. I teach first year on the opposite day of some of you guys. Some of the rest of you I know. Some of you, of course, are in my studio. But tonight we're going to go through Photoshop, which this is the fourth tutorial that you guys have. I think before we get started really quickly, I think it's important that you guys start thinking about moving between platforms. So CAD is good for some things, Photoshop's good for some things, Illustrator is good for others. As you'll see, InDesign is good for yet other things. Just make sure you're thinking about, excuse me, what program is best for what things, and you're using it as such. So the thing about Photoshop is it's good for images, of course, and it's good for pixel-based explorations. That being said, today's lecture, I'm going to do kind of a two-part tutorial. I'm going to do a quick lecture on photos and models, which is going to kind of breeze through a lot of big topics. And then we're going to do a Photoshop tutorial, which will be, again, it's a big program, but we're going to try to show just the tools that are most important to us for what we're doing in this studio. But it's tried, I tried to set it up, or we tried to set it up in a way that, we're getting you to look at certain drop-down menus where there's a lot of other options, and you guys should explore as much as possible. Ask questions too. All your instructors are pretty good with these pieces of software, so use them as much as possible. So to get started, just using models and using photos to explore space. We use models in architecture for a variety of reasons. We can use them, these are iterative models, which we'll do in Studio. We'll iterate, we won't iterate this many times, but we'll use models to iterate and look at design options. There's, of course, exhibition models that are built just to show people kind of the beauty of a building. But what we're going to do for this lecture is look at buildings that we want to get inside to explore certain spatial conditions. We, of course, are going to be using cameras rather than our naked eye, but this is how we're going to look at models. So we're breaking down a few basic ideas we want to pull out of photography and models, and the first one is scale. So as you guys might be aware, scale is something that we can use to trick the eye. So this is a side-by-side comparison of, it's from a film that uses scale to explore certain ideas. The film is a great film. You guys should watch it if you get a chance. It's called The Sacrifice. It's by a Russian director. But you guys understand that in Hollywood and in cinema, we use scale to kind of trick the eye and do special effects. In architecture, we use scale for presentation at times. So here you see a project by Peter Zumthor. If you look in the, I guess you guys on this side, you see he's presenting the model actually in the building. And then the photos on the opposite side, the split images are the model from a little ways away and then the model closer up. It's a little hard if you're not even, if the screen's a little blurry, you can't even tell if it's real or not. That allows us to start to think about ideas of scale, and as you'll see, spatial ideas as well. So here's the building as built. You can see it's very similar. And then this is another model. It's a crude model. You guys probably think it looks like a Flintstone model, but just to show you guys that you can take a very crude idea and explore spatial concepts very quickly with it. So you see these little white figures in the corner. If we get close, this architect, Peter Zumthor, is a very talented architect. You guys should all get to know him. Starts looking at simple things like outdoor space. So from this crude model, putting a photo down, tricking your eye to look at scale, we have something that could tell us a lot about a lot of different aspects. Light, space, use, other things. Here's another example. So you start to see the implications of what we could explore as architects just based on the simple tricking of the eye. And of course, one of the main ways that we do this, and one of the main ways we'll do this in Studio, is taking something that we know the dimension of, something that we know the scale of, and placing it in that model. So these are what we call, well, we probably call them different things, but entourage or scale figures or scalies, whatever you guys want to use. They're small people, and we all know how tall people are. So there's usually, 6 foot is a standard measurement that's easy, but anywhere from 5'4", 5'6", whatever kind of standard height you want to use. Some architects like to use their height, which is an easy way to translate the idea of being in a space to the model. And I'm going to run through, I'm just going to give you these broad topics and then give you a few student examples. So this might look familiar with what you guys are doing. This is a Carpenter Center from last year. And you can see, if you look at it from a long ways away, it kind of looks like an object, something that you could touch and grab. And you can see these little scale figures start to pop out. And you guys know the scale of it, but you can imagine if you didn't know the building, it'd be hard to grasp how big is that ramp? how tall is it? And then when we get closer in, you can start to, once you get your eye down or get your camera down and start looking at these spaces against the height of a human being that you know, you can start to get some implications of what this space is like. Here's another example, very different formally from the first example, but it's just an object from a little ways away. Kind of, it has all these different connotations. Maybe it looks like a flower, maybe it looks like a surface, maybe it looks like a landscape. But once you get your camera down and you start looking at it in comparison to the size of these little figures, these scale figures, you start to get some idea of what that space would feel like if and when it's built. So the next thing I want to look at is sight and context. In a very simple way, sight and context for us is basically background and foreground, or background for us. And we'll use this in our second project, project 2, a little bit more in depth, but I want you guys to be aware of it now. We'll see how we can do it in Photoshop very quickly as well. So this is a simple project by, it's a firm called Ome. They're looking at an existing building within Venice, and they're kind of exploring some ideas of what they can do within that space. And one of the first things they do to explore what they can do is make a model, right? So they make a scaled model of the place, and then they open it up. So all of a sudden you start putting these scale figures in this place, just like we talked about in the last example, and you can explore what the potentials are of it. You know, how many people can inhabit a space? All these other implications that you guys will continue to use throughout the semester and throughout your time as architects. But this is kind of an image that's a little bit of a provocation of what we can do with models beyond just looking at the scale. We can look at them in context. By using a photo of the context, here Venice is the background, we can start to think about how this building could fit into it. What are the implications? Here the implication might be all of a sudden we have a roof deck. What does that mean when it's adjacent to a very famous bridge or a very famous canal? Or what does it do when it's in a skyline that's very beautiful? And again, here's some examples from previous studios where we look at, in our project 2, the Museum Plaza. This is an analysis that it's a series of photographs around the project in a way to, it's a little small for you guys to see, but it's a series of photos at each point. Like in the side closest to me is looking at the tower that you guys will see on site. It's the tallest object on site as you're moving through. How does that change as you're moving through? Here's some more, a little bit easier to understand. This is just putting a model on site and then looking at what it can do to the background. So you can see, you know, on the right-hand side, you guys' right-hand side, just doing simple moves like opening up and looking at water and opening up and looking at sky and then kind of editing out the rest of the background. But we can do that by placing a small object, a scaled object onto site and then looking at the context. Here's another example, same idea. What do we do if we take a scaled model, put it on site, and then we can look at the context? So the next category that I want to look at is light. Light is not, it's a scalar. Light is the same in a small model as it is in a big building. So we can use that little model to look at what light's going to do in real life, which is an incredibly powerful thing. So here's an example of a lighting model, and its sole purpose is to look at the variation of the light on the surface throughout the day. Now, it's a tiny model with scale figures, but the light is going to be the same if this is built in real life. It's an incredible thing. Here's an architect, Stephen Hall, who does a ton of work with light, and a project that he's looking at called the Sun Slice House. This is actually a model of the building, but what you'll see is to kind of get the geometry of the interior of the building, he does all these cuts in these like models. He puts them on the specific site and he looks at what the light does. There's no guessing, it's all design. He cuts the hole, he looks at it, he cuts it again, and he designs the light with a model. Another set of them, you can see there's implications that you guys will get into more later in your careers probably, but materiality and texture and other ideas of what light can do in space. And then an example from your own studio. This is an example from the third project that you guys will look at called Museum Stairs. Museum Stairs, plural. But she is looking at what the light is doing if she has these cutout boxes across the wall, kind of like dappling effect of light, and you can see what it does in that space. It gives you a very good idea of what that light's doing, something that we can't do in drawings, or we can't do intuitively in drawings. So models are great for that as well. And this is a series of sort of walking through the model and seeing how the light changes. Which brings us into the last broad category that we're going to look at for models for our purposes, is models are also great for doing an analysis of a sequence through a space, right? You can't walk through a drawing, or not yet maybe, because you can't quite spatialize it, but in a model you can put a camera there and take a series of photos and very easily start to understand what it would feel like to walk through a space. Again, this is going to just be, this is your third project, Museum Stairs, of the semester, and this student is taking a look at a number of different views of the space as you're walking through. So as you're walking up the steps, as you're walking into another room. And of course, all the things from the last broad categories we looked at are there. He has scale figures that are done digitally, which we'll look at tonight, and light as well. And all these things kind of combined give you a powerful lens to look at models through. Okay, so we're going to move on to the tutorial. We're going to first talk about taking an object. You guys all did these cubes, and each cube is different. They all have different size. They don't really have a scale to them, right? Because we can take this as an idea and blow it up or shrink it down, and it can be a lot of different things. In real life, these have a scale. So just as a comparison, you guys all know these are 6 inches by 6 inches broadly, but we want to photograph them, and how we photograph them is actually very important. Everyone went through and did photographs of these models, excuse me, but there's a few broad things we want to talk about. First, I'm going to do this through an iPhone, and that's only because 90% of you are going to use iPhones. If you have the time, you guys should look at using a nice camera. Get an SLR, borrow it, use the grid, use the functions, look at it. It's an incredibly powerful tool. It can do so much more than your iPhone, but for the sake of simplicity in what we're talking about, just iPhone screen, simple grid. One of the first things to remember is you want to center your object and you want to keep your object square. In the same way that we're doing plans and sections, try to keep the relationships you want to maintained in the photograph as well. So if edges are meant to be straight, keep them straight, align them as such. There's nothing, well, there's a lot of things frustrating, but one of the things that's frustrating is if you're skewing a photo a little bit, it kind of takes the eye off it. It loses those relationships, and that's part of what we want to maintain. So center the object, and then this is going to go through a series of almost replicating plans, sections, or kind of architectural ideas, which is one way to photograph it, and then later we'll see another way of spatializing it. So center your object, try to keep the relationships that exist maintained. And then if you're going to do kind of elevation shots, you guys know that a camera lens will skew the image, or maybe you don't, but a lens is skewed, a lens is curved, so as you do that, the cube will start to skew in a way, or it'll become perspectival in a way that your drawings don't. So you see the kind of recession in the space, but what you also see is a horizon line, and the way that this is photographed is there's slightly different black materials, just so you guys can see, but there is going to be a horizon line. So kind of lining up or using your grid on your camera to align on the horizon line is a good way to keep your object sort of true to what it would be if it were sitting in space. There's other ways of photographing a model where you lose all background. So this could be floating in space. You guys see the difference? There's like a horizon line. You can look at that. You can play with it. You can manipulate it in Photoshop, which we'll do. But there's also a way of keeping everything black, clean surface, and then you have an abstraction to sort of think about in different ways. These are showing you some ways that you might kind of take an angle that's showing two sides at once, maybe similar to what we do when we do axons or obliques, and then different views. But explore your model. Take 2,000 photographs of one model and then weed out the best ones. Think about the ones that maintain relationships. Think about the things that, the photographs that show the ideas that you want to show. And just really quickly, focus is a big deal. You know, with an iPhone, you're touching a grid, but make sure things are focused, because if you're doing this quickly and kind of in a way that you don't want to, suddenly you get blurred edges and other things that you don't want. So here's where we're going to move on to the tutorial pretty quickly. What I'm going to do is, there's a lot of tools that you guys are going to want to learn. We're going to learn a few basic ones. Does everyone have an outline or has access to an outline through email? There's an outline of what we're going to do today. It'll have basic commands on it. If at any point after this you guys want to ask me questions, I'll be available, or James or Mike or Sylvia in studio, so don't be afraid to ask questions. But what I want to look at primarily is, this is basically a view of the cube from this side. But what we can do is we can get inside of these objects. It's so easy to kind of take photographs of a model as if it's an object. But to get inside of it, to study some of these ideas that we talked about previously, we talked about sequence and light and scale and all of these other things get inside the object. So what I'm doing is simply taking a photo, and maybe not even the best photo, but this is just an example. So get the camera inside. I think what you'll see when we move forward, this is an abstract object, but what you see moving forward is getting the camera at eye level. So what you're doing when you're doing kind of sequence photos or getting inside and sort of spatializing photos is trying to get that little tiny camera on your iPhone right at the level of 6 feet or 5'4" or 5'6". Here, I'm picking a point because we don't know the scale of this thing. It's 6 inches in real life, but let's just pretend like it's a building for right now. Let's pretend like it's a small pavilion. So I'm getting kind of guesstimating what the height is. You guys, when you do these in reality, or when you do it in studio, or when you do it in a project like Museum Stairs, will be sort of measuring that point and photographing from it. So this is me aligning horizons as a guess. Your guys' horizon will be a little more specific. So this is the object we're going to use for the tutorial. You guys all have it, so you guys can bring it up and do this entire thing with me, or you can just watch and ask questions later. Hopefully. Hopefully there'll be no questions. Okay, so this is, I'm just going to drag this onto my main desktop. And what you can do, there's a number of ways you can open this. Maybe we'll just open Photoshop first. But you guys can just do File Open, which is typical of a lot of programs. You guys should be used to this after the Illustrator tutorial. File Open, find your document, just like most programs, or you can just drag and drop. For simplicity, I'm just going to drag and drop and let it pop up. So this is what we end up with. You have this display window, which you can kind of manipulate and move. I usually like to pull it as wide as possible just to have, you know, everything kind of clean and available to me. And then you look at this, your basic kind of interface, you have tools on the left-hand side and you have tabs on the top. And then you have a series of options over here, which include your kind of layering options and colors and basics. If you guys are starting to get familiar with Illustrator at all, is anybody, how are you guys doing with Illustrator? How many people are in Illustrator? Using it? A couple of you guys, okay. It's a, it's a pretty thin tutorial last time, huh? Lots of models do. Okay, but it's a similar layout. So once you get used to this layout in Adobe programs, it's redundant. It's not the same, but you kind of find things in the same place. So here's your tools, and this is also your tools and your drop-down menus. Just like in CAD and other programs, they're redundant. So there's more than one way to do a command. There's also shortcuts, which if you ever look down on this drop menu, you see these little things, these little symbols on the side. That's showing you what the shortcut command is. Most of you guys, actually you guys are mixed, right? A little bit of mix between PC and Mac. So depending on what it is, it'll give you a different shortcut. But that shortcut is always, you can always type that in without dropping down menus. You can also hover over, like this is the Lasso Tool, you can hover it over and it has like a little L in it. That's your shortcut as well. So there's multiple ways to get to the same tool. I'm going to try to stay consistent. I'm not going to use shortcuts or try to, you know, pull any punches on you guys so you don't know what I'm doing. But that's also available to you. So the first thing that we want to do is, before we even go anywhere, this is maybe the most important thing I'm going to say all night, and I'm serious. This is the help menu. It is so good. And it's so easy to get frustrated and not think about the help menu. But what's great about the help menu is you can start to type in things, and then once you go down to it, see that big arrow? It shows you exactly where to go. I still use it all the time. It's like, where is that one command that I used at one time that was so great, that made that image amazing? Just type it in the help menu. It's really nicely set up. And I know that you guys, I've got a little bit older version of Photoshop. Your guys' looks a little bit different, but all the things are basically in the same spot. So bear with me if there's slight differences, but help menu, big deal. Okay, so moving on. You have this thing on the side, which is your layers. We know this from CAD. We know this from a lot of other things. We talked in studio about layers being an idea. You know, you're layering objects up. Think of just stacking sheets up, stacking even like transparent sheets. That's really what you're doing. It's not just an organizational system. It's also an idea about layering things. So you can move things above other layers. You can cut things out. You can move them down. It's an intuitive idea that I think is really nice to maintain. But the first thing that we want to do when we have an image is, see this little lock here? Whenever you bring an image in, it brings it in as a background image. Now, we don't want a background image because we can't manipulate it as much. So there's a couple ways of doing this. You can either just double click on it, and then it'll come up as name your layer, and we can say, main image. You can call it whatever you want, and it'll change it from a background layer to a regular layer. You can also, if you step back, you have the option of just creating a new layer and copying and pasting it over. But what we'll do is just double click and then just make this layer something. So that's our main image, and that makes it editable. So now we can go through and edit this image. The first thing that I want to show you guys is when we get in and we have this image, you'll notice that there are a number of things that you're going to want to look at. But before you do anything, once you take the photograph, you look back and you're looking at it, and like maybe I didn't really want to do that. Maybe the camera is really small and I don't want to get that. So you're going to want to crop the image to what you want to see. We'll crop the images in different ways. Sometimes you want to crop all your images at the same size, but for now, let's just crop for what we want to see. So the crop tool is this guy over here, and you just click on it. If you lose track of what's what, you can hover over again and you see what it is. So this is our crop tool. Just click on that and it brings up your cursor as this little icon. Don't get freaked out if you accidentally have caps lock on. It's the same tool, but it gives you, this is kind of like a crosshair, so you can be a little bit more careful. Every single tool has that. If your caps lock's on, you can kind of switch it to what I think of as more precise tool, like the crosshair, or something that you can kind of get into finer detail on. We're going to use the simple little icons for this so you can see, but the crop tool looks like this. So what I was saying is, I don't really want to see this little sliver of whatever that is there. I just want to make it feel like we're kind of all inside. So you just click on the mouse, click on one edge, you drag all the way across to the portion of the image that you want to cut off, and then you sort of see this dashed line where you're going to move it. Now, I think, for me, maybe I don't want to also see this edge of this material, because what I really want is I want this to feel like it doesn't have a scale, like it could be a large pavilion. And that kind of shows me that edge of the material in a way I don't want. So I click off, and then I get this box around it. And it has these little control squares at each point. That still allows me, before I do anything, to kind of move it and change it slightly. See what I'm doing? I'm just clicking and dragging. You can also drag the entire thing and move it around. And you can also use the little arrows to just nudge it. So you can kind of nudge it in one direction or another as much as you need. And when you're all ready, you can hit enter, and it'll crop it for you. So that gives me kind of, makes me feel like I'm in the space a little bit more than having those little edges. You'll find that when you're photographing models, sometimes you'll find a little blurry edge or something, something's really close in the foreground, it blurs a little bit. You want to crop that out so you have a clean image. But the crop tool is kind of one of the first things that you start to use when you pull the images in. The next tool, and one of my favorite tools, I love it, is called the clone stamp. And this is it's like God sent. You can clean up your model in any way possible and kind of duplicate an image from one portion to another. So when you get this into your space, you see that whoops, I cut a little wobbly here on my tiny model. And you think, how precise do I have to be to make a nice photograph of this? You don't have to be that precise. You can clean up in Photoshop. It's one of the beauties of it. So the zoom tool, also a very good one to know, is this little magnifying glass. Again, a tool that once you start using programs, it's on almost every tool. In AutoCAD, you zoom as well, but you click on the zoom tool, and you can either drag, just like we do with the crop tool, and then it'll bring up that window, whatever the extent of that window is. And then to zoom out, you can hit Alt on your Mac, and it gives you a little minus. See how it's changing? Otherwise, you just click and you can zoom into whatever you want. So I'm going to make a little box around this area that I want to clean up, little imperfections in my modeling that I didn't like. So then let's get back into the clone stamp. The clone stamp you click on, just like the other icons in the tool menu, and you have this little circle. And what you have when you have this circle is you bring options up on the top. Let me just click off just to show you. So generally you have this kind of bar on the top, but once you click on a tool like the clone stamp, it brings up different options. The first one I want to show you guys is the brush. Same with layers, this is sort of a way of, it's an idea as well. So you're using a brush. So you're using a way of like, you hear the phrase like airbrushing photos. It comes from programs exactly like Photoshop, is you have a brush that you're able to manipulate the image with. And you can change like different parameters of this brush, and the meter diameter is one of them. So it goes from a small circle to one that's so large you can't even see it, to a much larger circle. And then down here, these are all kinds of presets for what your brush looks like. So this one has, if you see the 100, that little image, that little icon is showing you like a blurred out image. So that's giving you like a blurry edge. And then like the 19 is showing you this hard edge around it. So that's showing you what you're gonna brush. That's in regards to the clone stamp, but it's in regards to everything else. You have all these other brush options. And you'll see you have ridiculous things like stars. You can have a star brush if you want. Don't do that, but that's an option. I have some things like grass in here, which once you guys get into more advanced Photoshopping, you can actually do Photoshopping with little grass blades, and it allows you to do lots of different things. For our purposes, I like to jump in with like a blurry brush, because you don't have to be so precise. It kind of allows us to make some mistakes and then reuse them. But let's just start out with the 100 size. You can click off. That's just an error because I clicked too many times, and it'll give you this image. If you hold Alt on your Mac, do you know what it is on PC? Not offhand. If you hold Alt on the Mac, it gives you your second option, which is like a little crosshair. Is anyone with a PC? Do you guys know what that?
It's Alt.
It's Alt as well. Okay, just double checking. And if you guys with PCs ever have like a little shortcut question, just raise your hand. We'll figure it out right here. But so you hold Alt and you have this little crosshair. What that's showing you is what you're going to copy. So clone stamp, copy, clone, what you're going to clone. So what I want to do is make this edge look cleaner. So I'm basically going to clone this little area. See that? So I'm going to grab this, and then when I move it, I see a preview of what I'm going to clone. And then I can go over here, and basically what it's doing is each time you click, it copies that point. I'm going to do something. I'm just going to step back. So the other thing that's really interesting about the clone stamp is you have, on these brush options, you have opacity, which basically shows you how much it's going to fill. 100% is it's showing you exactly what's on that image. If you go to 50% opacity and I click it, it's copying it, but it's much lighter. Okay, so I cleaned up this edge, but you notice it's like a little bit wompy. It like kind of angles down a little bit, and that's just because I was being a little sloppy, but you can control this as much or as little as possible. Just to go down here and show you guys another example, I'm going to use a higher percentage. I grab that edge, and then I try to line it as much as possible. And I can kind of clean those things up. We'll go down here and I'll show you another way. Another important thing to remember is if I was to just take it and drag, it will just copy directly behind me. But if I click and then I click multiple times, it kind of like, it's like it stamps it. And I think it's always better to kind of just like stamp once after another. But so you can clean up those edges as much as you kind of feel like you need to do. We don't need to clean it up too much because we're actually going to crop the background, but that gives you an idea of what that clone stamp can do. So let's move on to the next tool. Another one that I really like. This is called the Magic Wand. And if you roll over any of these options, there'll be multiple little drop downs on the side. So we have quick selection, Magic Wand. We just want Magic Wand. What the Magic Wand does is magic. But what it actually does is it clicks on color-based areas. So it'll pick based on different parameters how much we can select. So when we have a nice black background and you click on it, it'll select most of that black background all at once. Now that's a really cool thing when we're trying to do things very quickly. So for example, if I want to select as much of this black as possible, I could go through and do that in a fast way. And then what you can do is you can delete it, right? So all I'm doing is clicking on it, I'm hitting the delete button on my keyboard, and you can remove that portion. I could go through and do this to the entire background. And suddenly we have like a fresh background. That background, that little checkered, is your standard background. Most of you guys should come up as that. There's different options, but that's your default. So that'll show you kind of what's in the back. This edit step backwards, you'll see me do. You can do edit undo or edit step backwards, steps to like multiple different commands, as opposed to small things. So it'll sometimes cut out the number of like little steps you take in between. So I'm just gonna step backwards and show you another way of doing this. So I clicked each one individually, but if you hold Alt again, which is also your friend, you hold Alt and you can select multiple, if you hold Shift, if you hold Shift, you can select multiple things at once. Alt is actually the exact opposite. You can deselect it. See how that's going from a plus to minus on that little, and I could delete the entire background. The downside of the Magic Wand tool is it gives you these kind of raggy edges because it's picking pixels. It's making a decision based on contrast and colors, and it gives you these little ragged edges, and it can look kind of sloppy, and it can look pretty sloppy at certain points like this. The only reason it's able to cut out as cleanly as it looks on this right now is because there's a black background. And that's part of the reason we use black backgrounds, is to quickly edit them. But it doesn't always work. So don't always rely on the Magic Wand. It's more like I use the Magic Wand when I'm in a pinch and want to do things very, very quickly. So it's step backwards again, and I'll show you what I would do if I want to be more precise. So another way to cut things out of an image is the Lasso Tool. Lasso Tool is a basic that you guys are going to use over and over and over again. You guys all know what a lasso is, right? Some of you. It's like you see like a cowboy riding and there's like a silly rope. Nobody knows what a lasso is. One person knows what a lasso is. Two people. We have two people that know what a lasso is. Okay, three. James knows what a lasso is. So the Lasso Tool allows you to grab certain things. That's the idea. But the Polygon Lasso Tool allows you to grab things in lines. So you click on each thing you grab and then double click to end it. I missed it there, but. So I could grab a square. And then you have this dashed line that kind of selects it in different ways. Again, if you click and hold on a corner, you can grab just a standard lasso tool, which is a little hard to use, but you press down and then you just draw with it. And you're allowed to grab certain things. And when you end it back on itself, then you are able to select in a regular shape. It's hard to control. It is. Like, to be able to control a tracking pad and have that much precision to do things that we really need to do would be hard. Like if I tried to cut this background, yeah, it's kind of hard. So what I do and what I suggest is you guys always use the Polygon Lasso Tool for things like removing background, especially in architecture. We have so many orthogonal lines for now. We'll get a little bit more complex later. Some of you guys have circles. I saw some of the things in studio, but most people have straight lines. So the Polygon Lasso Tool allows you to select in straight lines. So I select points. What I would do is you can use the zoom tool, zoom in to kind of be more careful. But I always like to grab a little bit more than I think I need, so a little bit inside the line, just to kind of be careful. You kind of select where you go, cut all the way out. There's a little regular edge. Sometimes you just work with those and cut it out. And then you have this selected area that you can, again, just hit delete and it removes it, which gives you a much cleaner kind of edge than we had before, all the way across. It just selects a number of pixels all the way in a row. And you can see we're cleaning up this little edge with the clone stamp, but really when you're cutting it out, you just get rid of it anyway. So I missed a little portion up there. But I can basically cut all of that out. All right, you guys get the idea of that. The other option to remember, look up at this menu just like we did with the clone stamp. One of the important things to note is this little feature that says feather. What it says is 1 pixel. That's how much it kind of blurs the line between where you're selecting when you have this. For example, if I went 10, typed in 10, it's going to feather quite a bit. So watch the portion of the black. When you select it, it's blurry. I'm trying to be precise and cut out the background. That's kind of what I'm doing right now. But if you were to, do things a little bit more precise, if you were cutting out, something behind like a forest or something that you don't want to have a specific angle, you might use that. So that's how you cut out something precisely. I'm going to go back to the magic wand because I want to jump forward a little bit, but I'm going to select these things. So I select one, I hit shift, select another, I have that little plus sign, select another, select this, and I'm just going to crop it all out. Hit delete. And what I did is I just removed the background, right? I left a little foreground here underneath, but I cut out all of the background. And that's going to allow us to do something interesting. We talked about sight and context. This is going to allow me to put this into context in some way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back, and you guys have these also under links. I'm going to place an object in the background. Now I have two options for you guys. I have a city skyline and a sky background. You can use either of them. When you were doing projects that are based in a certain location, like we saw the project in Venice, you're going to use that as a background and try to coordinate as much as possible so that the placement of those images actually reads in the way that we want it to read. For our purpose here, we have this abstract object, so I'm just showing you guys a potential of it. But what I want to do is put that background here. I'm going to use this abstract sky background. But to do that, the first thing we want to do is go back over to this layers menu. And there's a little tiny button down in the bottom corner that says create a new layer. You can click on that and it'll say layer 1. You can change that to whatever it's going to be. I'm going to have it say background. And right now where it is it's above, right? So we have a layer above and below. This is like these things are stacked, right? They're layered on top of each other. You guys know probably intuitively already that we want that below. So we want the cube in front and that below, or the cube on top in the way we'd be layering this if there are pages, and the background behind. So whatever is in blue is highlighted. That's whatever is whatever is highlighted is available to edit. And you can even click on this, so I can manipulate the background layer now. I can manipulate the main layer now. Sometimes I even turn off a different layer. That's that little eye in the corner. Turn on and off layers. It's a handy tool if you have lots of layers and you want to just be looking at one object at a time. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to put an object in here. I want to put an image. So you click on that layer so you can edit it. And then you can go to File, Place. And then I want to go back to, this has my folder already brought up for me. You guys can find it. You should know how to do this by now by using other programs, but I want to grab this sky background. So I select it. It's a JPEG, which is important. There's multiple image types. There's JPEGs and PNGs. JPEG is the most common, but it's not the only one. Just a quick side note, PNGs when they come are nice because often they'll maintain the relationship between a background and an image. If you're using something like a silhouette person, that might be something that's helpful. But for now, JPEG's great. Click Place. And see what it does. There's this little grid in the bottom that's behind everything. And as long as I haven't clicked on anything, I can grab this and make it larger. Shift is sort of if you hold Shift on your keypad, you're allowed to kind of make something that keeps its relationship to one another, keeps its proportions. And that's what we want to do with this image. Now, if I didn't do that, I could sort of skew this thing in all weird direction. But what I want is I want those clouds to be in the same proportion that they are in real life. So I hold Shift and then I pull this button all the way down and I have a background. Once you have it in the position that you want to have it, click enter, and you can kind of see it. If I close this, I can see the image without the cube in front of it. But as long as this is still highlighted, I can move it around in different ways. Maybe I want that light to, hit this nice little square. And then I hit enter and it's there. Next, before you do anything, when an image isn't rastered, you can't manipulate it with all these other functions that we'll look at. But once it has this little tab in the corner, you know that you need to raster it. So you right click on it, and there's this option that says Raster Layer. You always want to do that, especially with a background layer. I always do that for what we're doing. So Raster Layer, and you see that thing goes away, and then we're able to manipulate this image in different ways. Okay, any questions so far? I know it's a lot. I know we're kind of jogging through it. Is it too much? You guys at least are seeing the potential of it? No questions. Good. You guys all know exactly what's happening? That's great. Okay. So we have a background image. Now it kind of feels like we're in context a little bit. Let me show you one other thing with these images, like the reason that we raster the image. We can go back up to the drop-down menu on the top, and there's all of these options. I would suggest you guys sort of just browse through, grab an image and just play for a little while. You're going to discover cool things. It's like going to a library and just walking through the stacks and seeing if you guys can find a book that's interesting for you with no specific purpose. Just pull up an image and start playing. For us, if you click on the tab that says image and you drop down, there's these very main settings under adjustments. So if you look at it, brightness, contrast, there's hue, saturation, there's color balance. What I want to show you just right now is brightness and contrast. It's one of the most simple things to understand when you're first using the program, but you click on it and it brings up this little window. Easy to use. You can drag these things so the image gets brighter, so the image gets darker. Maybe this wants to be a night image. Maybe it wants to be an oversaturated, very bright day. You can do all of those. Maybe it's a church. I don't know. And then contrast is the contrast between light and dark in an image. So that allows you to kind of either heighten the difference between those things or mute them down into something a little bit more gray. So let's go something like that and just keep it kind of as is. Okay. So that's background. You're placing a background within the image. You have something that starting to look a little bit spatial. It's starting to look like something that might have scale to it. You're starting to think, maybe this is a pavilion, maybe it's something like that. But the next kind of important thing to do, and something we talked about in the presentation before, is adding scale. So what we're pushing in this portion of the studio is using scale figures to show scale in these images. Now, we want to maintain the same scale in the models and the scale figures digitally as is intended to be the scale in the models. So when you have a 1/4 inch model, you still want to take photographs of that and then find a way to have a person that's the same size. Sometimes when I make models, what I'll do is I'll make sticks, literally like little dowel sticks, and I'll put them in as just markers so I know how tall a person is. Another option that's always available to you guys that you saw in the presentation is make little tiny people. Actually cut them, put them in the photo, and photograph them as if they're real people. But if you don't do that and you don't do the sticks, you guys can still kind of use proportions and use measurements on your screen to place digital people. And that's what we're going to do. So placing a person in an image it's really pretty straightforward. I gave you guys an Illustrator document, which every time I ask you guys about that, we have 2 people that know Illustrator, so we're okay. But open up Illustrator and look at what the potentials of that are too. But I'm going to go onto my desktop and just open this file. It's called people.ai, which is an Illustrator file. And it's just silhouetted people. It's on Dropbox, so you guys have this one. There's so many of them out there, and I'm sure your professors will give you a big, long file that has all these different people and all kinds of different sitting and standing and biking positions. But I will open Illustrator just for the sake of opening it. And this is what I talked about early on. Learn to go back and forth between programs. I know James said this, very first thing he said in his lecture was maybe not the very first thing, but Illustrator is a vector-based program. Photoshop's a pixel-based program. That's the distinction between the two, the big, broad distinction, meaning this is working with lines. Photoshop is working with little dots that show colors, more or less. But use them to their advantage, but you can copy and paste between the two of them, which is an incredible thing. So even though they're two different types of programs, I can grab something. Who do we like? This guy? Suit guy? I can select him, and then I go to Edit Copy. And then I'm going to minimize this. I'm going to click back on Photoshop. I'm going to create a new layer, which we know how to do now. We go down to the bottom right-hand corner, click New Layer. I'm going to call it Person. I'm going to click on that so it's highlighted so I can use it. And then I'm going to hit Edit, Paste. Same place in the menu. Now it comes up with this window that gives you different options. Pixels, it would turn this person into a pixelated person, which they'd be so tight that you really probably wouldn't see it. Path is something that we probably won't use as much, or Shape Layer. What I like to do is I like to keep it as a smart object. We don't need to go into that too far, but either Smart Option or Pixels is kind of the two things that I would do so far. So hit OK. And he's tiny. See him down there? So same thing. I would hit Shift because we want to make sure this person doesn't get all distorted. Hit Shift and grab one of the corners. And when you're grabbing this, you can kind of go in different corners, and you see that arrow pop up. But Shift and drag, and make this person the height that he needs to be. And once that's the right height, you hit Enter, and you can kind of drag him down. I actually think he's a little bit too tall. And so I want to make him a different height, or I want to manipulate him in some way. So we have this layer, and then we can go to Edit, and there's all these options, but here's the one that I want to show you guys tonight, Transform. So Edit, Transform, and then Scale. It gets me back to where I just was. So Edit, Transform, Scale, and then I can move him to different size. So this is going to be a little bit bigger building, right? Or pavilion. This would make it, kind of a huge pavilion. But that's how we play a scale. That's kind of the power of a model, especially a model that's a little bit more ambiguous as to what the scale is. So I drag him to a certain size, move him into position, hit Enter, and I have a person here. Same as last time, go back and right-click on the layer, and then Raster Layer. So now we can do different things with him. One of the other big basic things that we can do with different layers, once we have this layer selected, there's these options over here, and opacity is a big one. Opacity, the same thing we saw when we looked at the clone stamp, allows us to sort of, it's see through or not see through somebody. So 100% opacity, you can't see anything through. Click on that and you get another drag menu, or another drag bar, and you can see, it'll show you on screen somebody as kind of different opacities. A trick that I like to use sometimes when I'm doing Photoshop is giving a person just a slight bit of opacity, just because it seems to kind of push the person into the image a little bit more. Sometimes you put a silhouetted figure and it looks so stark that it doesn't look believable, but just a little bit, just so you can see through. Sometimes you can see those perspectival lines, it's a good thing. So hit Enter, we've got a little bit of an opacity through there, and we have a person in there. So suddenly we have, through Photoshop, we have foreground and background and scale. If you look really closely, we have light. So you get this idea of shadows and light that could exist, that could be, put on site, and you could use the actual light that you'd use in real life, and you can play with it. Now we don't have a ton of time left, but I want to show you guys quickly some of the. You guys are trying to pack up, don't do it. Really fast. I want to go through one last thing. We'll go right to 7, then we'll stop. I promise. But unless you guys have to go, you can go to another class. I'm not giving you a hard time. But there's all these post-processing techniques, but one of them that's interesting is taking this guy and then copy and pasting him and making a shadow. So to do that, what I like to do is you right-click, and you can always duplicate a layer. So duplicate layer. Now this gives you the name of the layer. You can call it Vector Smart Object Copy, which is an intuitive. So I like to just say shadow. Now it copied it right over top of it. If you looked really quickly, it was just a guy on top of another guy. But if I have this shadow layer clicked, I can manipulate it. So I can move over and I see there's 2 of them. Now that doesn't get me too much, but if I go back to where we were before and I do Edit, Transform, And what we did last time was scale. But if you keep going down, you see there's all these other options. There's rotate, skew, distort, perspective, warp, rotate, broad 180 degrees, 90 degrees, flip horizontal. What I want to do is use, let's distort. And then I have these control boxes, and I'm going to grab one corner, and this is going to allow me to just kind of bend this figure at will. So I grab one corner and I pull it down, and it's like it's in space. So it's wrapping one side down, and then I'm wrapping the other side down, and suddenly I can see he's sort of flipped over. But I just keep using these little tools to manipulate it. If I grabbed this middle tool, it allows me to kind of pull one direction. But what I want to do is I want to look at the image, and here I have light. You guys know where the shadows are coming from, right? You have light coming into one side, so I want to try to play with that so this person looks even more like they're part of the photo, part of the model, part of the space. So I start to skew him in, essentially the same direction as the shadow on the back wall. Try to line him as much as possible. I can kind of look at it sometimes, then I go back, edit, transform, distort again, pull it over a little bit. Try to line up the feet. It gives me starting to look a little bit like a shadow. What did you guys do? Things that we've done already before. What do you think would help? What is that? Opacity. Nice. So I go up and I grab this opacity tool and maybe hit it at maybe 50%, 40%. Sometimes I like to look at the shadows and see, what do the shadows look like in the model already? That gives us an idea of what the light is doing. So it starts to look a little bit more like that. That's pretty good. I would be happy with that right there. But since we have 4 minutes, let me show you one other thing. And this is beyond probably where you guys will get at Studio. If you guys get to this point right here, with models that are cropped with a background and foreground and light that's sort of not only real in the model, but then replicated a little bit in the scale figure with shadows, you guys are going to be doing pretty well. But one last post-processing technique to show you the range of things that you can do with this is, again, click. You have this shadow layer that is able to be edited, and I go up to Filter, and there's all of these options. And just go through them, explore these. But what I want to do right now is blur. And blur is something that you guys understand. It's distorting the image so it looks as if it's blurred in different ways. And there's all these options, but there's one that's called motion blur. This allows us to give directionality to the way we blur it. I click on that, and it gives me this window again, which is seen as very typical of Photoshop. And when you have these little windows that come up, if you can't see anything, you can zoom out till you kind of see what you're supposed to be looking at. So we have this, it kind of gives you the entire photo, but sometimes it's zoomed in a weird way, and you can drag up to it. So I want to see what I'm actually doing. This is my preview window. And you can click this button, previews, on most tools. It'll show you what it is and isn't doing. This gives me the amount that it's blurring. So like we saw in a lot of other tools, you can drag this little bar all the way across. But I want to give it just enough blur so it's believable. So I'm going to go kind of like that. That looks good to me. And then I have this other little dial here that I can rotate back and forth. That gives me the direction, right? So it's a motion blur. It's giving me directionality. Which way do I want to show it? I usually drop it kind of along that shadow line because that's what shadows do. They move throughout the day and they kind of blur on the edges and fray a little bit. Give it a little bit more, hit OK. Maybe it's subtle, but you can do it again. Maybe lighten it just a little bit. You have an image that looks pretty good, right? Lastly, something that we should have covered a long, long time ago, saving. Save often. Save often and over, file save. Very typical, but just keep doing it. You have options. You can always drop down this menu and save it as a JPEG. That'll flatten all your layers and you won't be able to edit them. Just keep it saved as a Photoshop. That'll maintain all your layers, everything will be there, you'll come back, you'll open it up, and everything will be good again. And that's the basics of Photoshop. Anyone have any questions?
So what if the picture isn't as HD? So then when you're putting an image, so we're trying to fix the picture. Because sometimes when they
That's important. The number one thing that I would look at, background images, when you go to Google search, make sure they're large images. When you have a really small pixel, like a really small image and you try to blow it up, it's just going to get pixelated.
Is there any way we can fix it? Or?
You can't make it more high definition because it's based on the number of pixels that are in that image already. So if you blow it up, those pixels just get bigger and bigger. So it's just like bigger and bigger squares. So you just have to find as large of an image as possible. When you get really in tune to this, you can actually match the pixels in your photo that you're manipulating with the pixels of the background. And then you have this really nice relationship where everything looks like it's part of the same world. But for now, for the sake of what we're doing, just make sure it's a large image. Any other questions?
So, for our actual project, are we supposed to throw in a background and a figure? Or
For which one? For
the photographs?
For the Carpenter Center, you kind of have a background already, right? You have that beautiful brise-de-lait. I would focus on getting natural daylight. Photos always look better. You guys take them outside. They're going to look so much better. And take them outside at a time when the light isn't directly straight down. So if you go at like noon and we have this white material, it's just going to bounce light everywhere and it's going to be very hard to focus. But, you know, kind of earlier, like mid-morning and kind of at the evening when the shadows are a little long, you get some really beautiful photos. So for this project, I would focus on using kind of either taking them outside and manipulating the background so you edit it out, or using just like a little photo booth in studio so there's a black background, and then getting down into that image as much as possible. But for the next project, project 2, you're going to be in the museum plaza. And for that project, definitely, we're going to want to manipulate the background and place images in. And for that one, you're going to be taking your own photographs. So you'll have the same camera, same photo type, and you'll be able to put them together very easily. Anyone else? Okay, guys, thank you. Let your professors know. You can email me, you can email James, any of us. We're all here to help, so let us know. Thank you.